Hello, bonjour, hello, hi, heya, and privyet, hockey fans. Welcome back to the Europuck podcast, the show where two Brits talk all things European hockey as part of the Hockey Podcast Network. My name is Hayden, or Odd Man Rush, as you can see up there, and some of you who are watching the video version of this podcast might notice we have a fancy new graphic here in the background. I know, right? I know, it's crazy. So before I talk in more detail in that, there's Chris. Hi, Chris.
Hello. I'm here as normal.
Of course he is. I mean, did you expect me to get anybody else? I mean, we've had Team Great Britain's netminder, we've had Chris Ellis, we've had other Chris's on the podcast, but you know, I just can't get away from Chris Gadsby.
It's not for want of trying to get somebody else.
Exactly. So, I had a quick chat with Dylan and Ish, who run the Hockey Podcast Network, and Dylan was very kindly set us up with a few new graphics because we've seen some of the comments that you guys have been mentioning on our YouTube uploads and some of the other bonus clips and stuff. And Chris and I have been talking about it recently and been like, oh yeah, we kind of need to make the extra window when we're talking about certain things a little bit bigger. And we've got this wonderful window here as well, so that when we're just like here, like talking, whether it's the intros, the outros, or if we start going really long-winded into a topic, we've got this chance to just kind of flip over to this. So that's wonderful.
The chances of us doing that are high.
Yes, very true. Us rambling? Come on, Chris. No. Never happened before in my entire life. But I want to start off this podcast, and Chris very kindly reminded me to do this before we hit record, and that's to thank everybody that has subscribed to the Europuck Podcast YouTube channel. 500 subscribers on the channel we've had less than 4 months worth of episodes and bonus clips and uploads. So a big thank you to everybody that helped us reach 500 subscribers so quickly. And also if you're listening on Apple, SoundCloud, Pinecast, wherever else, Google, I think we're on Google Podcasts as well, or Google Music or whatever it is. Wherever you listen to the podcast, we do appreciate it. Thank you very much. We've also now got our handy dandy, Chris can't see it, but we've got our wonderful little social media handles on the screen as well. We've got our Twitter and our Instagram, so you'll be able to check them out as well as our own personal ones at the top. So personal ones at the top, our ones at the bottom. If you're listening to this via one of the other ways, except from YouTube, everything I've just said in the first 2 minutes of this podcast really doesn't mean anything to you. You can always check it out on YouTube as well and get the video version as well. So Chris, how are you doing today?
Yes, been interesting. Happy Hockey Day to all the Russian listeners.
Yes.
So when this goes out, it's belated, but we're recording this on December the 1st. So yes, happy Hockey. Is your Christmas shopping done yet?
My Christmas shopping, I managed to get most of it done through Black Friday sales. So kind of like aggressively searching Amazon and being like, okay, I'm probably going to end up spending more money than I would hope. The good thing is I've been locked in my house for the entire year, which I was anyway, but I've been locked in my house for my entire year. I've got the opportunity to spend the money that I would have obviously spent on other things like coffees and bus tickets and car parking and all of those wonderful things that you don't realize.
Going to America.
Yeah, exactly. Going to Canada and working at a summer camp. Thanks, COVID. But yeah, so I think I've managed to get all of my immediate family, all of their Christmas shopping done. What about you? You managed to get everything sorted?
Mostly, yeah. I've got a set of grandparents left to get, but they want some baking. Well, I can't do that a month in advance.
Well, you could. It'd just be disgusting.
Well, yes. And then my mum wants a family picture of us and the cats. Aww. And I was like, cats don't want to sit still. And you have to hold them there and hope it's pointing, and it's just not happening.
You have to put the camera on a 10-second timer, and then the scramble to pick everything up and bring it in.
That, but they won't sit still.
So
we tried it with what was our only cat on Sunday morning, and now we've got a new kitten that arrived on Sunday afternoon, and they're nowhere near being picked up yet, so I'm going to have to think of something else. Yeah. Because it's just not going to happen.
Or, Chris, you've made a fair few number of thumbnails for me over the years for my YouTube channel, so why not take a picture of them, just edit them in. Problem solved. Just take a nice picture.
I contemplated doing that, but was told that it would look rubbish by my partner. So.
But at the end of the day, Chris, you got to do what you got to do, right? If that's the only option you've got and the only time that you've got to explore that option, then so be it. Anyway, that's enough about Hayden and Chris's lives in COVID lockdown. We've got to mention it every once in a while, but let's talk about some hockey now because there's plenty of interesting things going on within Europe. And we're going to move over to this handy dandy new image here. Boom, look at this. Oh my God, wonderful. I've got it on the wrong tab. That's tremendous. Right, so like Chris mentioned, to begin with, Hockey Day in Russia as we're recording this. Well, happy Hockey Day to everyone in Russia. I'm not sure if we have many Russian listeners, but if we do, happy Hockey Day regardless.
We have every Russian listener.
Yes, because
everyone in Russia listens.
Our podcast is so fluent for those Russians.
Exactly.
So the next thing I want to look at is obviously what we usually start these episodes with, Chris, and that's looking at some standings. Should we look at some standings?
Yeah.
Let's look at some standings. So we're going to start off with the KHL standings. We're going to probably blitz through these because we've got some big topics we want to discuss for the rest of the episode.
League starting.
Indeed.
It seems like 3 months since we last talked about league starting.
Oh, absolutely. And given the fact that, we've had a lot of guests and our conversations have been a lot related to the Elite Ice Hockey League within recent weeks, we want to make sure we give the rest of the leagues around Europe their due diligence and make sure we give them the look they deserve. And then we're just going to sit here and talk about the Elite League for like 10, 15 minutes. Good? Okay, perfect. So, the KHL, let me take you through that first. So, CSKA Moscow is still at the top of of the Western Conference. SK St. Petersburg taking a penalty shot loss to Jokerit yesterday. Very close game. I've noticed that the SK St. Petersburg are running with a couple of youngsters on their first line. They've got Kirill Marchenko and Morozov, I think, playing on their first line. They're both 19, 20 years old, which is impressive. CSKA Moscow at the moment actually currently losing to Kunlun Red Star of all teams. That's interesting.
What?
Yeah. CSKA Moscow are 2-0 down to Kunlun Red Star at the moment. There you go.
Oh, well, according to my thing, it's only 1-0, but sure.
I think it literally just updated as I refreshed it.
Okay. It may not have updated for me yet.
So you've got Moscow, St. Petersburg in first and second. Then you've got Lokomotiv and Dynamo Moscow in third and fourth, who, as we mentioned on our social media, on our Twitter, they conducted a trade recently. Timu Polkinen going to Lokomotiv, Magnus Pajavi Svensson going to Moscow. So that's going to be an interesting move. Lokomotiv currently leading 2-1. Dynamo Moscow locked in a 1-1 tie. Dynamo Minsk in fifth place were 3-0 up in their game today against Neftahimik. Then we have Spartak Moscow in sixth. All the Moscow sides are doing pretty well so far this year. Jokerit in seventh, but they're only 2 points back from Spartak with 6 games in hand. Sevastopol Sharapovets 2-1 down at the moment to Lokomotiv Yaroslav. So they're in 8th place. Then Vityaz Podolsk, HC Sochi, who also made a trade with SK St. Petersburg recently. And of course, everybody's favourite Latvian team, Dinamo Riga, down in 11th place. It sucks, but they've had a tough season this year. So 9, 10, 11, the 3 teams out of the playoffs, pretty much at the halfway point of the season. Vityaz, Sochi, and Dinamo Riga. Then in the Eastern Conference, we have Akbars Kazan in first place. We have Avangard Omsk in second place. Salavat Yuleev in third place. Traktor Chelyabinsk, who are currently 1-0 down on Torpedo. They're in fourth place. Metallurg Magnitogorsk, they are playing Dynamo Moscow. They're the other team in that 1-1 tie. Avto Mobilist Yekaterinburg, currently in sixth place, although only 8 points separating first place and sixth place, which is crazy. Then Torpedo in seventh place at the moment because they're leading 1-0. Sabir Novosibirsk in 8th place. Baris, Amur, Neftahimik, and Kunlun taking the 4 spots in the Eastern Conference outside of the playoffs. But Kunlun Red Star doing a pretty good job beating CSKA Moscow 2-0. So, Chris, it's been a fortnight, I believe, since we last looked at these standings.
Yes.
What are your thoughts?
My thoughts are that the East is very much kind of starting to split now. The games are pretty even. And there is that 9-point gap now. So the 3-game gap between 6th and 7th, and of course 6th being Avto Mobilist have got games in hand as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it very much is kind of starting to split. You've got arguably kind of 4 teams, Sibir, Torpedo, Baris, and Amir fighting for 7th and 8th in that in the Eastern Conference. Neftahimik and Kunlun are already quite a way back, really, although Neftahimik has got games in hand.
Yep.
Standings in the West, CSKA, getting far out in front. You were always expecting them to be up near the top. It's slightly surprising latest score at the moment, but of course when this comes out, we'll know whether or not that sticks.
Of course.
But it is much tighter there. You've got 6 points separating 4th from 9th in the West. Sorry. Obviously that we're having Jokerit in it is a lot more. The games are a lot further apart. But once you add the 5 games in for Jokerit, let's say they average out of the 5 games, possible 15 points. Let's say they get something like 8 or 9. That takes them up into 4th place. But then you're still talking 6 points between Dynamo Moscow and Vityaz. So all to play for in the bottom half of those playoffs. Again, Dynamo Riga, we know they're out of it already.
Yeah.
And Sochi are a long way back as well. The two sides that, or Riga in particular, have had a lot of problems so far this year. So you're starting to be able to eliminate teams off the bottom that you kind of say even at this stage aren't going to make the playoffs, but there's a lot of obviously moving around that can be done within those playoffs.
Absolutely. And I think, like you mentioned with Jokerit specifically, we can't quite make a judgment on, okay, we've got the lock for the first 8 teams until Jokerit is potentially caught up a little bit. Because like you mentioned, they're sitting in 7th place at the moment, 25 games played. So they're 6 games back at least on every single team except Dynamo Riga. Obviously, Riga had loads of problems with their quarantine also. But you notice that they're only 2 points back from Spartak Moscow. They're only 7 points back from 5th and 4th place. So all it takes is for them to go on a bit of a winning streak, which they've won their last 2. They've got points in 4 of their last 5 games. So it's not outside the realm of possibility, obviously dependent on their schedule and the teams they're coming up against, that they could go on sort of 3 of 5 wins or 4 of 6 wins and something like that and be right back in the competition. So I feel like with both the Western and the Eastern Conference, there's an absolute logjam at the moment for the top sort of the first seed. Maybe not so much in the Western Conference because CSKA Moscow have got such a huge lead on the rest of the teams in the league and the division. But if you look at SK St. Petersburg down to Dynamo Minsk, there's really not that much separating those teams. Then if you look at the Eastern Conference, separating Akbars Kazan from Avto Mobilist, because then obviously you've got that huge drop between Yekaterinburg and Torpedo, 8 points difference with 1 game in hand for Avto, you know?
With the games in hand that Avangard have got, they can easily jump up to the top. And, Tractor, if they win both of theirs, that's 6 points there, then level with Akbars. So there's a lot in the East that can move around. I think that very much kind of that's there. And obviously we've got that gap. So you're definitely talking, top 6, bottom 6 in the East. In the West, CSK are already out in front, but that midfield is really logged together. So there's going to be a lot of movement, and it's probably one of these things where they're like that. And, we're 30 games into the season now, so we're a good chunk into the season. And it may well come down to the last week or so before we know what the lineups are going to be. Yeah,
I think it's going to be a case of a month before the season's done, we're going to know which teams have made it. It's just a case of where and who they're going to be playing in the first round of the playoffs. Because I remember obviously 2 weeks ago is when the last time we looked at these standings. The Eastern Conference is pretty much still the same as what we were looking at. Yeah, the teams are in slightly different orders, but based on the fact that we'd already known those top 6 teams, I think it's going to stay. Those top 6 teams are going to make the playoffs, and it's a battle for the 7th and 8th seed, which Baris is still very much in. You could argue Amur is kind of in that race. They'd need to go on a bit of a strong run for the rest of the year. Whether that's possible or not, I guess we'll have to wait and see. But like you mentioned, HC Sochi, Dynamo Riga in the West, and Neftekhimik and Kunlun in the East. We've pretty much found 4 teams that are very, very unlikely to make the playoffs. Not impossible, but highly unlikely to make the playoffs. And I think go for it.
We can legitimately say now in the Continental Hockey League, we're halfway through the season.
Yeah.
It's a 62 game season. Actually, it's less now because there's not the extra team in there. But, with 30 games in, we're at the midway point of the season. And it is starting to show. As you said, there's 23 teams in the league, 16 in the playoffs, so 7 miss out, and we can already comfortably say who 4 of them are.
Yeah, I didn't even think about it like that. Yeah, like we already know half the teams that aren't going to make the playoffs, so it really is a battle for the sort of 7th, 8th, 9th, maybe 10th seeds. They're the ones that are really battling for these final few positions in the playoffs. And we already saw the week before that the Eastern Conference is pretty much decided in the large chunk of the teams that have made it. I feel like the Western Conference wasn't so much that, because I mean, the Podolsk has the same amount of points as Sharopovets does, and then obviously if Sharopovets are losing against Lokomotiv at the moment, or they had a recent loss against Lokomotiv, Podolsk, if they come in and play their next game, they leapfrog them to take a playoff spot, So
yeah, I mean, obviously anybody can go on a run and change things up. It's just what the kind of indication is from what we're seeing.
Yeah, absolutely. And to be honest, there aren't really many teams other than Avangard at the moment who are on a 5-game winning streak, and Sabir that have won 4 of their last 5. There aren't really many teams that are going on these huge runs. Dynamo Moscow's won 4 of their last 5, as has SK St. Petersburg have won 4 of their last 5. So,
The thing that jumps out at me is that how Avangard really, when you look at the table, they've played 31 games. They've won 19 in regulation and only won 1 in overtime. If they're going to win, they really take it, and win in regulation. But then when they find themselves behind, they battle hard.
Oh, absolutely.
And out of the 11 games that they've lost, they've still picked up a point in 6 of them. And that's one of the big reasons why they're up there. Compare that to Akbars Kazan, who have needed 6 games further than regulation to gain themselves extra points.
Yeah. That's a good point. I guess it's a case of Avangard have been a lot better at keeping the games close. But to be fair, to Akbars Kazan's credit, when they've gone to overtime, more often than not, they've been the more successful team. Whereas Avangard, they've only won 1 game in overtime, whereas they've lost 6. So it's a case of
there is that way of looking at it. Yeah.
Yeah. So it could be a case of once the playoffs hits and it's continuous overtime, 20-minute periods, 5-on-5. Does it mean that you're more used to winning in overtime? Does that give you the edge because you never made it there that often? Does that give you the edge and you've been more of a complete team and shut it down when the final buzzer sounds on the 3rd period? Like we said, we've pretty much got a good sense of which teams are making the playoffs.
Yeah.
It just depends on which order. It's going to be very interesting to see. The Eastern Conference, we could sit here and give 3 or 4 different predictions as to how it's going to end up, and it could end up completely differently with who's in front and who's sitting at the bottom of that seeding.
Yeah.
I feel like the Western Conference, there's still a little bit more to play for. There's not so much of a gap between the teams, the fringe playoff teams, and the teams that are already in the postseason. But the second half of the KHL season is going to be a lot of fun to watch. It always is. It's the best league in Europe. I mean, you could say arguably, but it pretty much is, let's be honest. So let's move on to the next league, the next biggest league in Europe, the Swedish Hockey League, which of course has 14 teams. Chris, do you want to take us through which teams are in which order, and then we'll get our thoughts?
Can do. Give me 2 seconds.
Yeah, no worries.
No
worries.
So, as you can see, I have a dual screen setup when we do this podcast now, so I have to kind of skip between one and the other. So the Swedish Hockey League, again, as we mentioned a couple of weeks ago, a really big difference here in the teams who have in the games that the teams have played.
Yeah.
So you've got Frölunda at the top on 38 points, having played 20 games. Orebro's second on 34, but they have played 2 games less. Then you've got Rögle underneath in third. Now they're only 6 points behind the top, but they've played 6 games less.
Yeah.
So they really, they're on a 10-2-2 record, Rögle, whereas Frölunda are on 12-7-1. So it's really different. Then you've got Vatch in fourth, Skellefteå in fifth, Lelea in sixth. Again, a big disparity there in the number of games played, which makes the Swedish Hockey League one that's really quite difficult to talk about because there's so many permutations with the difference in games. Then in the round of 8 for the playoffs, you got Färjestad, Oskarshamn, Leksands, and Desjardins. And then having absolutely nothing is HV71 and Liköpings. And then in the play-out games at the moment, you've got Brynäs and Malmö. But again, because of all the difference in the games, not maybe so much for Brynäs and Malmö, but they are still quite close, bear in mind 3 points for a win. So, there's nothing that those guys can't do yet to change things around. And whereas in the Continental Hockey League where we were just talking, there was that 9-point gap between 2 teams and you had a top half and a bottom half. Here, the biggest gap between teams is 4 points. Yeah. Well, that's only really 1 game. 1 game in an overtime loss, and there's your 4 points. So, and again, when you look at the form guide, other than Oskarshamn, who have lost at least their last 5 in a row here, no one's really on a massive streak. Desjardins have won 3 in a row. Rögle had won 4 before losing in overtime to Orebro in second, 6-5 in overtime. What a game that would have been. Yeah. Or that was, rather, should I say. So it's a difficult one to really kind of get your head around, and one that we kind of go, teams haven't really moved too much, but we can't really talk much about it because of the disparity in games.
Yeah, I think it's less so much the disparity in games when you look at the bottom half. I think pretty much Rögle's the only team that has a huge number of games in hand to play, but obviously they've put themselves in such a fantastic position that they're in third place with 6 games in hand, like you mentioned, on first place Frölunda and 5th place Skellefteå, and they're 6 points back from first. So all they need to do, like you mentioned, they've got points in their last 5 games. They've won 4 of their last 5, but they've only dropped 1 point in their last 5 games. If they go on that streak again, they're going to be at the top by the time all the games are, or by the game, once they're said and done and everything. I'll try and get it out of my mouth when I can, you know. But I feel like sort of 12th to 14th. So with Linkopings, Brynäs, and Malmo, there's that gap starting to open a little bit where they're kind of being left behind by the rest of the pack. But like you mentioned, Linkopings 2 games in hand on HV71. They win both those games. They leapfrog them, and they're close to taking 10th place. So obviously,
I mean, if they win both those, they go up to 22 points.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a case of, you know, different, where it differs to the KHL, obviously it's 2 points for a win, 1 point for an overtime loss. Whereas here it's 3 points for a win, and was it 2 points for an overtime win, or 1 point for an overtime win?
Yeah, it's 3 points for a win, 2 points for an overtime win, 1 point for an overtime loss, and then nothing for a regulation loss.
That's it, yeah, which makes sense, like, let's be honest. But, yeah, so it's kind of like we're about 10 games behind the KHL. I'd say a dozen games behind overall compared to where the KHL is at. I'd say the SHL is getting to that point where it's halfway through the season. They're not quite there yet. I'd say within another couple of weeks. I believe there might have been some teams in the SHL that have been shut down for a few weeks. I'm not entirely sure if that's correct or not. Could you potentially look that up for me while I'm talking,
Yeah, I mean,
Chris?
I think with with the Rögle gap, I think that's a fairly safe assumption. I mean, yeah, they had so Rögle didn't play from the 27th of October until the 10th of November.
Okay.
So they had a fortnight away.
Okay. But is it a case of because, I mean, for example, Växjö are playing Frölunda tonight, apparently. I wasn't sure if there was any sort of stoppage in the SHL. I thought I'd heard something about that, but I might be wrong, because by the looks of it...
I'm not aware of anything off the top of my head. But
I'm just talking rubbish then, so there you go. But anyway, it's a case of, you know, we are starting to see a bit of an order in some of these teams and where they're being placed, as you would expect 15, 20 games into the season. However, like we've said so many times with so many different leagues so far this season, there's still all to play for. Like, I mean, yeah, Malmo might not win the league. It might be very difficult for them to win the league and jump up all that place, but they're not out of the playoff running yet. They're not automatically being in a play-out round. We're not in a position where we're seeing a team that's won 2 games this season and they've played 20 games. And it's so statistically difficult for them to jump back up and do something here. So it's going to be interesting once again with the SHL. Obviously, great hockey there in the SHL, and they've got a lot of games coming up before Christmas. So I think it's kind of by the time Christmas rolls around, we'll have a much better sense of where these teams are at, which ones are the legitimate contenders, which ones are kind of holding on for dear life. But anyway, let's move on to another Northern Europe country with the Finnish Liga, which has been very interesting, actually, the last few weeks, because there's been a lot of movement with a lot of these teams, which I wasn't expecting, to be honest. There's some teams that have done very, very poorly in the last few weeks, some teams that have played very well. So we've got Lukko up in first place in the Finnish Liga standings. They're winning 1-0 at the moment, or have won 1-0 against IFK Helsinki. 42 points, but also on 42 points is Ilves. I believe they were first place last time we checked, so still a fight there in first and second place. Also with 19 games played but 7 points back are the Pelicans. Then you have Helsinki, the aforementioned Helsinki team in fourth place. TPS Turku in fifth place, 1 point back from Helsinki. Kalpa in sixth place. That's all of the quarterfinals decided. Then sort of the round of 8 playoffs, you've got Karpat, Tapara, Kuku and Asat. Tapara recently lost to Vassen Sport 2-0, which is interesting because Vassen Sport is sitting in 11th place. However, the difference between 7th and 10th is 4 points. The difference between 6th and 10th is 4 points. So, you know, like we said with the Swedish Hockey League, still a huge disparity between some of these teams. And there's not so much a difference between the amount of games they've played. I mean, Kalpa and Vassen Sport have played 17 games and Karpat have played 16. But at the end of the day, most of the teams have played 18, 19, 20 games. So there's not going to be a huge difference. Then you've got, outside of the playoffs at the moment, you've got Vassen Sport, Saipa, Jukurit, JYP Jyväskylä, and Hämeenlinna. I mean, JYP Jyväskylä, 5 straight losses. Hämeenlinna, 1 win in their last 5, points in 2 of their last 5. Then you've got the Pelicans that have got points in their last 5. But it's really interesting to see how this is developing so far this season, isn't it, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, Hämeenlinna down at the bottom as well have been dealt another blow. When was this posted? Not sure. It doesn't seem to have a date on it. But all of their fixtures have been postponed between now and the 20th of December. The situation in that region has worsened rapidly. It says in much of southern Finland, so they may not be the only side that has games postponed. I only noticed this because their game today has been called off.
Right.
But all public events and general meetings of more than 10 people are prohibited indoors.
Wow.
So of course they can't play ice hockey.
Yeah.
So there are other regions as well. The South Karelia region, I don't know if there's any teams in that, is valid throughout the whole of December.
Okay.
So not only are Hämeenlinna down at the bottom of the league, but they've now got 3 weeks of no hockey where if you can't have more than 10 people, they may not be able to train either, which is obviously going to hamper them even worse. But yeah, so it's looking unlikely at this early stage that they're going to get many games in between now and the new year, which when they are already, 8 points adrift of the playoffs, I mean, that could easily be 18 points by the time they come back if results don't go their way, because they've got at least 4 games postponed, including games against Saipai, who they need to be playing and beating, Jukurit, who they need to be playing and beating. The one against Ilves, they might not be too concerned about, seeing as Ilves are in second.
Yeah.
And Tampere as well, but they've got 2 games that have been postponed against the teams around them.
Yeah, and also it causes a problem that they're going to be fighting an uphill battle, not just on the standings and on the score sheet, but like you mentioned, if they're out for the next 3 weeks potentially, they're going to have to try and, if they're in a position where no more than 10 players can train at a time, they might have to have scheduled and tiered practice sessions with their players. They're going to be in a position where they're fighting from games behind. And like we've mentioned in previous weeks, that can be a position of strength. But if you're a strong team and you're a team that knows you can sit at the top of the standings, if you're already down in the bottom of the league, yes, by 1 point, and a win would put them up in 13th. So, there isn't a huge disparity between the teams that are outside of the playoffs at the moment. But at the same time, they're not going to be fighting from a position of strength. They're going to have been out of the loop and they're going to be out of game shape after 3 weeks. I can imagine, I've never played hockey professionally myself, funnily enough, but it's going to be difficult for these players to keep up game shape and be fit and ready and kind of find their groove when they're being told, right, you're not allowed to play for 3 weeks. So I wouldn't be surprised, like you mentioned, Chris, if some of the other teams in the Finnish league go down. We've already seen the QMJHL kind of take an extended holiday break, so I wouldn't be surprised if they decided, you know what, maybe the closer we get to Christmas, let's just extend the break by a couple of weeks, flush the virus out of the players and out of the system, and kind of see if we can get back going. What are your thoughts on that?
So again, a couple of other bits of news. So I've transferred from the Hämeenlinna website onto the Finnish legal website.
Okay.
So the 30th of November, which was yesterday.
Yes.
All of Karpats currently sitting in 7th are postponed. The 6 home matches will be postponed there as well. It seems as though it just says home matches. They may still be able to play away.
Interesting. Okay.
But so 6 home matches of Karpat are going to be postponed in December as well. So it's not, there's particularly in Finland as well. We kind of always knew this would happen when the weather got colder. It would kind of come to fruition a bit again.
Yeah.
Obviously, I'm guessing up in the Nordic countries where it's a lot colder, it's it's even a bit worse than that. And also, November the 28th, you may or may not have seen this, but I'd say congratulations to Markus Nurmi, who scored in the, I'm trying to look at where it is now, off of TPS Turku. He scored the league's fastest ever goal.
Wow. Okay.
4 seconds into the game.
Wow. That takes some effort,
yeah.
So
Yeah, so it was basically win the opening face-off and then just put it straight in.
Well, I mean,
it's pretty much what it was 4 seconds in.
Yeah, so I mean, you can't really ask much more from your starting lineup, can you? So there you go, and that's a really bad way for the opposing team's netminder to start the game, isn't it? Start off 4 seconds in, allow a goal.
Not a good start from Assat, is it?
No, absolutely not. Right, so
you want to know what's even better?
Go for it.
So Turku, they scored 4 seconds in.
Okay.
They then scored 1 minute and 20 seconds in.
Oh no!
And then the starting netminder got subbed out.
Oh
1 minute and 20 seconds in.
Oh. 80 seconds into the game, the coach was like, right, you're out.
80 seconds into the game, you get subbed out after conceding 2 goals in the first 80 seconds.
Now, could you imagine if that was the only professional hockey game he ever played? It's probably not, but could you imagine, like, I was a pro hockey player for 80 seconds?
I kind of feel bad for him. He's only 18 years of age.
No.
And that was his first game of the season.
Oh, it was his first game of the season as well? No! No! Oh, yikes.
A save percentage of 33% and a goals against average of 90.
Oh, Jesus Christ. What? Makes me want to vomit. What? But, anyway. Yeah. So anyway, let's move on from the Finnish Liga. Let's not embarrass that 18-year-old enough. It's bad enough he had to go through it, as opposed to 2 British guys sitting there feeling sorry for him. Anyway, let's move on to the Swiss National League next. Obviously 12-team league, and still very close at the top. We've got the top teams that are very close. We've got the sort of middle of the pack that are still very close. And to be honest, the relegation teams aren't really that far away. So you've got Zurich that have jumped back up into first place in the league with a 5-game winning streak. Now, with the caveat that they have played more games than any other team except the Rapperswil Jona Lakers. You've got Lausanne that have been sitting up in the top of the league for most of the year, second place, but they're 3 games back with 1 point in hand, or 3 games in hand, 1 point back. 5 wins, straight wins for them also. So, these 2 teams are really battling for it at the top. Then you've got Fribourg Gotteren in 3rd place. You've got EV Zug in 4th place, Geneva Servette HC in 5th place, and HC Lugano in 6th place, which are the quarterfinal teams. And there's 4 points separating 3rd and 6th. I mean, there's only 9 points separating 1st and 6th. So still very close, still pretty early on in the league. And considering how many difficulties they've had with the virus this season, it's a miracle they've managed to keep their season running, to be perfectly honest. Then the Rapperswil Jona Lakers taking the first of the a round of 8 playoffs. Then Biel, Ambry Piotta, and SC Bern currently sitting 7th to 10th. Now there's only 4 points difference between them. But the interesting thing, the difference between 10th and 6th is 7 points. So, whilst whilst Rapperswil and Biel are pretty close to those sort of quarterfinal playoff spots, obviously the further you get down, the more difficult it is. The only really interesting one is HC Davos, which you're thinking, they're a storied franchise. Joe Thornton's playing for them at the moment. They're sitting in 11th place in the league. To be fair, they've only played 9 games this season. It's important to mention that. They've got at least...
They struggled again with the virus.
Yeah, which sucks. And it's kind of... It kind of seems like every week we've got a different team from the Swiss National League struggling and having to postpone games, which was kind of similar to the KHL situation a few months ago as well, to be fair. But Davos, the good thing from their position is they've got 5 or 6 games in hand. Obviously, like we mentioned with the Swedish Hockey League or the Finnish Liga, they're not exactly going to be coming from a position of strength. And by the time they start playing games again, Joe Thornton, one of their best players so far this season, might be back in North America as the NHL season might be getting underway. So that's going to be a huge blow to them as well. And then obviously you've got the Langau Tigers with 1 win this season in regulation, 2 wins total with an overtime win, 8 points on the year. So there's already 21 points separating 1st and 12th. Can the Tigers still make it into a playoff spot? Yes, there's still the potential to do so. Of course there is. Is it likely? What do you think, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one. I mean, I'm looking at the top here because, I mean, it's so easy to go on a run. So let's look at Lausanne, for example. If we take the Swiss Cup game out, they've won the last 7 in a row.
Wow. And
they've won 9 out of the last 10. To really push themselves up there. I mean, it's, it is easy to do. And then again, if you look at Zurich, they've won their last 5 in the National League, plus a couple of games in the Cup. So, it can be done. And that again, you can see those 2 teams at the top, but they haven't pulled away.
No.
I think because they started from a little bit behind. When you compare them to your Fribourg, your Zugs, your Genevieve Servets.
Yeah.
And, it's no one other than those two teams at the top that have gone on the run. Other teams haven't. It's kind of win one, lose two, win two, that sort of thing. So it is very close. Again, particularly with the games in hand and the changes. Again, because it's 3 points for a win. So it would be easy for Zug to pick up a couple of wins in there. 5 games in hand they've got over Zurich, and then they're right back up there. Similarly, Davos, they've got 6 games in hand on Zurich. Let's just say they win them all, get 18 points. That's 28. They're up in second.
Yeah.
It can change a lot. And the Swiss league it's quite early on.
Yeah, I think that's the best way to put it. Obviously, we want to keep you up to date with how the scores look every single week, or as many weeks as we do these types of episodes as opposed to guest episodes. But yeah, once again, with all the problems that the Swiss National League has faced, it's still very early days. We're kind of seeing, as we go on with the weeks, there's less leagues that we can kind of use that. I'm not going to say excuse, but it kind of is an excuse to be like, oh, it's still early days for us to be able to give like a full analysis of what's going on. But at the same time, we can only go with the results that we've got in front of us, and there's not a huge amount from the Swiss National League at the moment. So there you go. So we move on to the Czech Extraliga next. Yeah, why not? Because I'm in charge.
I was going to say this would be. We can provide less stuff this year than any other year because of all the postponements that have had to be happening. So normally all the games are much more equal. Talk a lot better than we can do this year, because there wouldn't be a 5-game difference, 6-game difference between the teams.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very fair point. So, on that note, thank you, Swiss League. But let's move on to the Czech Extraliga now. So we have Trinek in first place, who have just taken a 4-2 win against third place Sparta Prague. You've got HC Pulsen, who took a 2-1 loss to Liberec recently. So you got Trinek, Pulsen, Sparta Prague, Mountfield HK as the top 4 teams in the league. Then you've got Vari, Mlada Boleslav, Liberec, Vitavice, Kometa Brno, Olomouc, Zlin, and Pardubice in the sort of round of 8, if you will. So 5th to 12th place. Now, interestingly, Trinek are kind of starting to pull away. They've got 3 games in hand on Pulsen, who are in second place. And they're 5 points up. So if Trinek play well in those few games, they're going to be way up ahead compared to the rest of the pack. But other than that kind of battle for first place, the rest of the league is very close, especially when you talk 2nd to 7th overall. There's only 7 points difference. And like we mentioned, this league's 3 points for a win. So, a team just needs to go on a run of a couple of decent games. And if we're talking Vari or Mlada Boleslav, or Vitavice even, there's a few teams or a few players there, a few sides that, they've got a few games in hand. So if they win those games and catch up, the standings could look completely different when we come back to look at it a week, 2, 3 weeks from now. And then in the teams outside of the playoff race is Litvinov, but only 1 point out compared to 11th and 12th place Zlin and Pardubice. And then you have Sesk Budjovic, who have played 2 more games than Litvinov, and they're 3 points back. They recently took a loss to Pardubice, by the sounds of it. Olomouc are currently playing Karlovy Vary, and I think that game has just gone a 1-1 tie at the moment. So
this is the caveat on this is that as we're talking through this table, there is a complete fixture list.
Yes.
There is a complete program of games going on at the moment. So by the time we've even finished recording this, the table could be different to what we're saying now.
Oh, absolutely. And it probably will be different. But that also, like we mentioned, or like I mentioned a minute ago, it just goes to show how kind of busy it is. And there's still so much to compete for in this league, wouldn't you say, Chris?
I think the good thing with the Czech Extraliga is that because they did that blanket suspension of the league, it means that all the teams are still close enough on games. If only half the country had been suspended and half the country could play, then it would be a lot more difficult. But it does allow us to see this change. So as you said, it's very close between 3rd and 7th. There's only 4 points in it. And then also between like 9th and 13th, there's only 6 points in it. Well, that's only a couple of games.
Yeah.
And there's obviously still a long way to go in the Czech Extraliga. They've still got a good 35 games to play. So a lot can still happen. I think that's kind of the thing that we have to always bear in mind when we're doing these like weekly updates is the fact that not a great deal changes week to week.
Yes.
You kind of have to compare what it is now to, say, a month ago to look at it and say, okay, well, that team's been on a high, that team's gone down. Whereas when you look at it every single week, it kind of almost loses the impact to us talking about it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of those situations where, for the KHL, for example, the standings do change relatively noticeably each week because they play so many games every week. There's been teams that have been hit by the virus. There's been no blanket quarantines. They may knock out a team or two. Then there's the leagues that might not necessarily been hit by the virus too badly, or they've been able to keep playing through it. And there's 3 points for a win, and they do that system where you see a noticeable change, but they don't play as many games. They only play at the weekends, or they play 2 games a week or something like that. And then you get kind of the mid-tier European leagues, like the Czech Extraliga, obviously the Austrian league that we're going to be talking about in a moment, and kind of some of these other leagues. You can even put in the Swiss National League there for argument. They may or may not have been hit badly by the disease or by the virus, so they're either having blanket quarantines, loads of teams are going into lockdown, there's loads of different situations that are going there, so we might see that there's no change whatsoever because the league hasn't been playing for the last 2 weeks, so... And that's just kind of the nature of this season. Like, if we were doing this last year during the 2019-20 season or during the 2018-19 season, it would have been completely different, and we would have been able to kind of mark at least somewhat of a change between the league and between the teams in the league. But regardless, we're not doing that then. We're doing it now. So let's move on to the Austrian Ice Hockey League, which is, of course, home to our last week's guest, British netminder Ben Bounds. And his team are doing pretty well, all things considered. However, they have been overtaken in first place by HC Bolzano, who are on a 5-game winning streak at least, and they've only played 11 games. So, 6 games. Wow, okay, fair enough then.
6-game winning streak.
So basically, they've won their last half games, and they'd only lost 2 games before that anyway. So, Bolzano were doing a pretty good job to start the league so far. Then you've got, obviously, the Graz 99ers, 15 games played, 28 points. So, they're still very much in the race for first place, but there's going to need to be... Bolzano are going to need to go on a bit of a weak stretch, because if they win their next 4 straight games, it's going to be difficult for any team to catch them by the midway point, let's be honest.
Yeah, it was a tough result for Graz 99ers earlier on this week on Sunday, actually losing by 10 goals to 2 to Red Bull Salzburg.
Oh, jeez. See, this is why you need Boundsy in net, Graz. Hopefully he's going to get back soon. Hopefully he'll be okay. This is why you need him. No, obviously, no offense to the starting netminder of Graz that game, but that is not an easy loss to take, is it?
No.
So... then you've got Verhaver, you've got the Vienna Capitals, Klagenfurter, Red Bull Salzburg, like Chris mentioned. Then you've got Innsbruck, Dorburn, Bratislava, Villach, and Steinbach BW. Now, there is starting to see a bit of a gap between these teams, as you would expect, sort of 15 games into the season. Vienna obviously have a couple of games in hand. Salzburg have a noticeable amount of games in hand. So Salzburg are doing quite well. They're only 8 points back with 4-5 less games played than most of the teams. Vienna are only 2 points back from Bolzano, and they've played 2 more games. So I could very much imagine we see Bolzano, Vienna, and Salzburg sitting in first, second, third by the time all of the points are kind of counted up.
Yeah. I mean, when you look at the points, yeah, okay, take Salzburg. They've got 4 games in hand over Klagenfurt, who are in 5th. You would expect Salzburg to pick up a decent number of points from 4 games, a possible 12, even if they only pick up 6.
Yeah.
That takes them up to 26, and then you're seeing a top 6, bottom 5 split in this league. And then the battle is going to be not being the team that misses out on the winners stage of the league. And just trying to make sure that you don't end up in 6th place, because there is starting to have that gap. And you can see that in the wins as well. When you look at, Steinbach right at the bottom, have only won 1 in the last 5. Villach as well, Bratislava, then they're starting to drop off. There is that now. If we take Salzburg out of it because of the games in hand, there's a 7-point gap. That you need to pick up points in 3 games to make that up, and that's where you're going to start to get that split between the teams at the bottom and the top.
Yeah, very, very similar to some of the previous leagues we've just looked at, like the Czech Extraliga and the Swiss National League. Yeah. When we come back to this league in 2 weeks' time, there could potentially be such a huge gap between the teams that are making the playoffs and the teams that aren't. Yeah, so it's going to be very exciting to watch. We're rooting for the Graz 99ers, obviously, because, Ben Bounds is our boy now. And, so let's move on to the next league, which I believe is the Polish Hockey League. Yes, it is. So, there is pretty much a 2-horse race at this point in the season, to be perfectly honest. You've got Yastreby with 51 points in 21 games and Tichy with 49 points in 21 games. Then there's an 11-point drop to Katowice and Una Oswiecim. Then you've got a 4-point drop there to Torun in 5th place. Then a 1-point drop to Podhale in 6th place. Then Krakow 1 point below them. And then Sanok is 12 points behind them. So we've pretty much figured out here, and I think, Chris, you're the one that alluded this to me a couple of days ago. The Polish League, we've pretty much know which teams are making the playoffs. I think that's kind of decided. I think
Yes.
It's pretty much going to be a case of, is it Yastreby or Tichy that makes it to or wins the league? And then it's a case of which order do these teams make the final 8, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that. I mean, you can pretty much say that Dansk and Zagłębie are not going to be in the playoffs.
Yeah.
They're 14 points back already, which is just it's 5 games. And considering that at this midway point of the season, because I think the Danish league the Polish league is pretty much at the midway point.
Yeah.
But I will just double check it. But yeah, you can kind of see they're not going to be making it. Yastreby at the top. I mean, let's have a look at what winning streak they're on. The fact that I've got to click the show more matches to find a loss tells you. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. They're on a 10-game winning streak.
Jeez.
Which, I mean, 12, 16, 22, 25, 32, 38, 43, 49, 55. And so they've scored 63 goals in the last 10 games. So they're averaging 6.3 goals a game.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, exactly. So you can understand why they're up near the top. I'd say the game that really jumps out to me, though, which is actually the last game that they lost. They haven't lost in the whole of November. The 23rd of October was their last loss, and it was a 10-8 defeat to Unai Oswiecim.
Wow, okay. Jeez, talk about a high-scoring match.
So when you lose a game, by 10 goals to 8, like, where do you even?
Yeah,
you can't look at the forwards for the problems with that, can you? When you lose by 10 goals to 8.
Well, it's certainly the offense isn't a problem. It's just the team didn't work very well on defense.
So last year they played 47 games. So again, we're pretty much at the midway point.
Okay.
We may as well say they're at the midway point. So you can see what if Dansk have only won 2 games in the first half of the season, I can't see them winning you'd need to win a good 10, 12 games.
Yeah.
You needed to win half your games on the way in to stand a chance of getting into the playoffs, and I just can't see that happening somehow. I mean,
trust us, there's probably going to be something happen where somebody's going to clip this, and then at the end of the season, it's going to be like they went on a 15-game winning streak, and
they did a St. Louis.
Yeah, they literally pulled a St. Louis Blues. But yeah, I mean, obviously at this point, yeah, we're only halfway through the season, but I think it's fair to say if the status quo remains, which hockey and the sports world, everything changes so quickly. But Yastreby and Tichy are going to be in the running for the first seed.
Yeah.
And kind of the Champions Hockey League place and everything like that. I think it's the regular season as opposed to the playoffs. I'm not too keyed up with that with the Polish Hockey League. Don't think it really matters at this moment in time. But then it's just going to be a case of a fight for who gets home ice advantage, really. And kind of, if we're talking other than Sanok in 8th, we're talking Krakow down, from Katowice in 3rd down to Krakow, we're talking 6 points difference. That's a 2-win difference. And I mean, Torrens played 3 less games than pretty much every single other team, and Podhale's played 2 less games than pretty much every other team, and Krakow has actually played 1 less game. So we could see a position where there's an absolute logjam between 3rd and 7th, and it's going to practically come down to the final goal of the season for some of these teams, which will be very exciting.
You look at Katowice and you look at Podhale. I mean, they're on 4-game winning streaks.
Exactly.
And Torun are on a 3-game losing streak. Okay, they're drawing at the moment, but so again, you've got these forms, but I think it is pretty much as you said, which 2 teams aren't going to make the playoffs. Sanok look as though they're going to be taking the 8th seed, and then it's just a massive log jam in the middle. Yeah,
and I think fair play to Sanok. I would imagine their fans okay, we might not be the best team this year, but as long as everything goes to plan, we're kind of like, we're cruising in the 8th seed, just like we're 14 points up from any of the other teams below us. We should be okay. We're not the best team in the league. We're not doing the best this year, but you know what? We'll be happy. So let's move on to the Danish league, the Denmark Metaligaen. So this is the league that we had the 0.5 points, which Chris, I believe you... Did we talk about this last time we talked about this? Or
we didn't talk about it. Okay. I was looking for it, and then I found the answer, and then somebody was kind enough to tell us the answer on the Europuck podcast Twitter as well, and it confirmed what I had done already. I've just got to try and find it again now. But it was basically the fact that they got postponed, the games, and then rather than replay the games, they got given 1.5 points each. So each team got given 1.5 points. What was confusing is that on the league standings, they'd either given them a win. Yeah, they put it on the league standings as a win, but only given them half points, which is why the maths didn't work for me.
Right, okay, that makes sense. Fair enough. So it's a case of all the teams that were set to play during that period, which is why there isn't every single team that has 0.5 points. Every single team bar 3 teams, which is interesting. Yeah, because that would make 6 teams playing. So all of the teams bar 3, their games were cancelled. So they went, okay, we're going to give each team put a win on their record. It's kind of a forfeit win for every single team, and give them 1.5 points, because then it means that no team is favoured, and they could give them all 3 points, but then that would kind of stretch things out a little bit too unfairly for the other teams that didn't get to play that day. So, I mean, compared to the Polish league, things are a lot closer in the Danish Meta League with about 20 games played. So I'd imagine we're about halfway through the season, given that there's only 9 teams in the league. So with 0.5 points in the lead in first place is Rungsted. Then the Aalborg Pirates with 42 points in second. Esbjerg Energy, 39, 0.5 points. So very much first to third. There's still that race for first place. And then it's kind of the rest of the pack after that. 30 points, you've got Sondersjijk Ice Hockey. Then you've got Frederikshavn, Herning Blue Fox in 4th, 5th and 6th. Herlev and then the Mighty Bulls in 7th and 8th. Then the Odense Bulldogs, the only team currently not in the playoffs. They're 5 points back. And the Mighty Bulls are 5 points back from Herlev in 7th. And then Herlev are 5 points back from Blue Fox. So you've very much got the top 3 teams that are fighting for that first place. You've then got 4th to 6th, which are 2.5 points difference. Then you've got the bottom 3 teams, which there's a 10-point difference between them. But we're kind of starting to see these little battles within the war that is the regular season within the Danish Meta League, aren't we, Chris?
Yeah. And I mean, no, it's always, unless there's like another round of postponements, it's always going to look weird with the 0.5s. But yeah, I mean, they've got again, a full program going on as we speak. It's just started. Everybody at 0-0 early in the first period. But yeah, again, as you said, we're seeing that with only one team missing out. I know Odense already at the bottom, having lost a good number of games in a row now. Okay, it is only 5 to be fair to them, but they have lost 8 out of the last 9.
Yeah.
We're really starting to see, as you said, a split beginning.
It's going to be very interesting. And I know I say that basically about every single league, but it is, in my opinion, very interesting to see like the kind of little differences, kind of the little battles, like I mentioned, within the war that is the regular season, like the little skirmishes that take place throughout the season. And like we're seeing the top 3 fighting, then we're seeing the next 3 fighting for their positions, then we're seeing the final 3 fighting for their positions. So, I mean, it's still all to play for those top few teams. Kind of 4th downwards, they're going to have to be, basically the mission now is secure a playoff spot, which, I mean, it's not outside the realm of possibility for any of those teams. I kind of feel like, yeah, it might be Odense that kind of loses out at the end of the day based on their recent performances, but there's going to be one unlucky team, which kind of sucks with the way that the league is set up, but there's going to be one unlucky team, and maybe that's Odense this year. So then let's move on to the Norwegian League, which is the Fjordkraft Ligaen. And there's a couple of teams that aren't necessarily playing very well. This is more sort of the Polish league treatment that these guys are getting in terms of the differences between some of them. So you've got Friskaska in first place, 36 points in 14 games. Storhammer with 32 points, Valerenga with 30 points, Lillehammer with 26 points. So 6-point difference between first and third, but then a 10-point difference between first and fourth. So once again, top three teams fighting it out. Then you've got the Stavanger Oilers. Go for it.
Again, I was going to say it could change, but as we're talking now, it's first versus second. Frisaska are playing Storhammer as we speak. Frisaska, having scored 2 goals in the first minute of the game, are 2-0 up.
Oh, wow.
So that gap, as it stands at the moment, is 7 points.
Oh, wow. Okay, fair enough. I mean, at the end of the day, sounds like we've got another Finnish League 18-year-old netminder going on here, which, another one, 2-in-1 episode. But then we've got Stjernen in 6th place with 20 points. We've got Sparta Sarpsborg in 7th place and Mangelrud in 8th place. And then comes the relegation places, which, let's be perfectly honest, I cannot see these teams making it back into the running based on how things are at the moment. I mean, based on the fact that the 2 teams above them have only played 12 games this season also, it kind of makes things even worse. So you've got Gruna in 9th place and Narvik in 10th place. Gruna, 14 games played, 7 points, at least a 5-game losing streak. Narvik, 1 win in 16 games, 3 points, at least a 5-game losing streak, which is obviously going to be, I would imagine, a lot more. So, Chris, what are your thoughts on the Norwegian League so far?
Yeah, I mean, we've just had a comment through on the Europut podcast YouTube channel that mentioned Narvik. I'm just going to try and bring it up.
Okay.
Because it'd be great to. I've tried and see which one it's on though. Is the other thing about it. So we'll have to see what happens. But as you said, I think it's very unlikely that the 2 teams at the bottom there will go through. So Gruna and Narvik. Here we go. Yeah. So thanks to Pekka 80. So Gruna and Narvik, who are in the relegation zone again, they're actually very lucky teams because they were on their way to the first division last season as well, but because of lockdown, they just cancelled the season rather than relegating them, and now it looks as though they might they might go down anyway.
Yeah. So, I mean, they got lucky with last season, but kind of like what we were talking about with Ben Bounds last week when we were like, oh, let's make sure that Team GB staying up in the top league wasn't just a 1-year fluke. We didn't get in by like a technicality. Gruna and Narvik stayed in because of a technicality when, by the looks of it, they really shouldn't have. So,
well, Narvik's, I'm just having a look. Narvik's winning game was the 3rd game of the season.
Oh, jeez.
So they're now on a.
Oh no.
So take 2 losses off this. They're on what, a 13-game losing streak?
Oh no, Narvik,
13-game losing streak.
Narvik, no.
They probably aren't much better. So.
No, I mean, to be fair, they've won 2 games and lost a game in overtime, so they are, like, technically double better, but, 2.5 times better.
Narvik, I'm just looking at, like, Narvik's last few games.
Oh,
They've
yeah,
lost
for sure.
11-5, 8-0.
No. No.
I mean, to be fair, before that, they lost 6-4 and 6-5, so they have been scoring goals, but it's not going well.
Yeah. Well, sorry, Gruna and Narvik.
Anyway.
You got another chance to play up in the big boy league, and it's just not going to work out. Sorry, guys, but that's the way it goes. If it weren't for them, it would have been 2 other teams in the league going down. So, like I mentioned, bit of a logjam up in... It's kind of a race for first and second then based on the 1v2 matchup going on at the moment, as Chris mentioned. Then other than that, it's very much kind of the next 3 teams are fighting for a position, and then the next 3 teams are fighting for a position, really. So... yeah, very interesting to see. We've got one final league to look at, and that is, of course, the French League Magnus, although we do need to... I'm pretty sure they're still under their lockdown conditions, right, Chris? So I just wanted to mention...
No, they're out now.
Oh, are they? Okay, fair enough. There's still not many games played. I mean, Bordeaux has jumped out much further ahead compared to any other team in the league this year. And I say jumped out ahead. They've played 11 games, but they still sit in 5th place. That must be, like, so disappointing to be like a Bordeaux fan or a Bordeaux player. The fact that you've played arguably almost double, potentially triple the amount of games than some of the other teams in the league have played, and you're still only good enough to get 5th place. I mean, you've got Rouen in 1st place, having gone undefeated so far this year. They've only played 6 games this year, Rouen, so they're doing really well for themselves, like fair play to them. Then you've got Nice in 2nd place with 9 games played. They're 3 points back, so they've lost 4 games. Anglais, or Anglais, 8 points, 13 points in 8 games. Amiens have 12 points in 8 games. Then you've got the aforementioned Bordeaux. Got Angers with 11 points in 7 games. Gap with 10 points in 5 games. Then you've got Chamonix Mont Blanc with 9 points in 6 games. Mulhouse with 7 points in 8 games. And then you've got the 3 teams sitting at the bottom, who have all played 4 games. And Briançon, they've got 1 point in those 4 games, which was an overtime or shootout loss. But other than that, I'm not really going to lambast them too much for the fact that they've played 4 games and 2 of them have won 2 of those games. They're only 1 point back from Mulhouse, 2 of these teams, and they've played half the amount of games. So I'm not really going to go into them too much, you know.
The French one, it's not really a league we can talk much about, and I'm very conscious of the time as well. But it's when they've been hit hard, but as I said, they had the month suspension when France went into national lockdown again. So their league is really kind of struggling at the moment to really get going. But it's in such early stages, as you say. There's teams that have played 4 games. When you compare that to the KHL, we've played 30 games. We really can't talk too much 4 games into the season. So we'll move on to some of the discussion topics.
Absolutely, but I'm rooting for Briançon. Regular season winners. I'm calling it now. 1 point in their first 4 games. They can do it. I believe in them. But before we move on to the discussion topics, let me just quickly take you through the predictions that Chris mentioned. Yes. So let's just move on to these quickly. It should, they all show up just about okay. So it's November 30th to December 6th. These are the new sets of predictions. So we have the Bratislava Capitals against Innsbruck, Billy Tigray Liberec against Pilsen, Lugano against Biel, Luleå against Malmo, the Mighty Bulls against Odense, Una Osfashim against Jastrzębie, which is going to be an interesting matchup, Narvik versus Frisaska, well I know who's going to win that one, Luko versus the Larden Pelicans, Anglais versus Rouen, and then Severstal Sharopovets versus Avangard Omsk. So
I put a few games in where I kind of thought I would guess the winner pretty easily, so that we could get a culmination of points. So last week, congratulations to Prague Hockey Freak, who won with 10 points last week, and he has actually closed the gap. So still Henrik is leading overall, the cumulative total. I think he's on 25, I think he's on now.
Okay.
If I got the Excel document up, I'd be able to say exactly, but I do know that Prague Hockey Freak has cut his gap down to 3 points, which is just one correct result. So it can be quite tight in the predictions as well. But yes, congratulations to Prague Hockey Freak for winning this week, and to Henrik for still being out in front, as he has been since week 1 in the overall standings.
But still all to play for, folks. Ooh.
There is. I mean, we've got, 5 months or something?
Oh, yeah, we got plenty of time, because also when some of the leagues stop playing, then we just add extra fixtures from the leagues that still are playing, so it works out very nicely. But the good thing about this is, for example, the Frisaska Narvik game, those people that actually do listen to the podcast the whole way through will have an advantage, because they'll know that Narvik have been absolute crap so far this season, so
they might do. Yes, I mean, to be fair to people, I'll have to get it all, but I don't think many people would have predicted the 9-0 victory that happened this week. In fact, obviously nobody predicted the 9-0 victory that happened this week. The 8-0 shutout, and the 9-2. The closest we got for the and again the 10-2 victory, that last game of this week, the 10-2 victory where we had a 4-3 overtime, another 4-3 overtime, a 3-1, and a 4-2.
Yeah.
And then it ended up being 10-2. I mean, it's,
wow.
You're not going to, but points around. But yes, so if you don't already play the predictions, keep an eye on our social media channels. They go live every Sunday.
Yes. And I think we should get into the habit of trying to post it on the Monday also, just before the games start, just to, because, Sunday's kind of that day where people are kind of busy chilling out and not necessarily checking social media.
Well, the reason I post it on the Sunday is because Flash Scores only lets you look 1 week in advance for fixtures.
No, that's very true.
If I did it any earlier.
No. I completely agree. Let's do it on the Sunday, but also on the Monday as well, like a reminder tweet.
We will.
The first games drop 30 minutes from now or whatever. Yeah. Okay, perfect. Yeah. So those are the next week's worth of predictions. There's a 2-horse race in the predictions, but get stuck in.
No, it's more than a 2-horse race. Those are just the top 2.
Okay, fair enough then. Right, so we've got one noticeably large topic to talk about, which you might have seen earlier on in the episode when I was on the wrong tab. And then we've got the biggest topic. So these are pretty much the last two things we're going to talk about this episode because we've already gone for an hour. So
I know.
the Penny DEL, the German Deutsche Eishockey Liga, the 2020/21 season. We finally got an update, ladies and gentlemen. It came several weeks ago, but bear with us here. It's going to start the season on December 17th with 14 DEL clubs taking part. So Ice Hockey Germany had to wait a long time for this news, all the better that it is now very clear. The DEL season starts with all 14 clubs taking place. That's a brilliant piece of news. No teams are going to be missing out because of financial situations or geographic locations. So the first match day will take place on December 17th. From there on, there is ice hockey almost every single day, sometimes up to 3 games in one day. So German hockey fans, you've got a lot to look forward to. The exact schedule will be published soon, and all games will be broadcast live on Magenta Sports. The managing director of Penny DL is pleased with the positive news and said, quote, "This was hard work for everyone involved and true teamwork. Just a few weeks ago, it didn't look like all the clubs would make it." Well, that's an interesting point to make, the fact that just a few weeks ago, there were some teams that were like, okay, we might not actually be able to sustain ourselves financially. So obviously them, or not necessarily financially, but personnel-wise, perhaps. Our goal has always been that we wanted to start with 14 clubs if possible. We succeeded, so the praise goes to everyone who has contributed to the fact that we can now start the season with full strength. All fans can look forward to non-stop ice hockey. The coming season will be played in a different kind of setup due to the current situation, as you would imagine. The season includes 28 regular season 28 regional game days, 24 games per club in 2 groups, as well as 14 games home and away against the 7 teams in the other division. So that's sort of a 38 game season, 40 game season, something along those lines, I would imagine. Obviously, this is Google translated from German to English, so might not be exactly correct, as you might have noticed with some of them. They've also highlighted the groups: Eisbären Berlin, the Fishtown Penguins, Düsseldorf, Cologne, Iserlohn, Crayfield, and the Grizzly Wolfsburg will play in the North group. In the South group,
it's a North-South divide.
Yeah, so
so what they've tried to do is they're grouping the teams together to minimise the travelling and hopefully reduce any possible spread from obviously people going north to south and all the rest of it. So the idea being is that if the northern group has to shut down, the southern group can carry on and as you'd expect there.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to mention, in the South group, you've got the Augsburger Panthers, Ingolstadt, Adler Mannheim, Red Bull Munich, the Nürnberg Ice Tigers, the Straubing Tigers, and the Schweiniger Wild Wings, which, of course, those of you who have followed our content for a while will know why we like to keep a track on them. So after the group stage, there will be a best-of-3 playoff series. They're the top 4 ranked clubs in each group. So the top 4 make it through, best-of-3 playoff series. Then the semi-final series... I'm not sure what that means. Then crosswise, the quarterfinals are played within the group. Okay, so semifinals then played between the divisions. I see. Okay.
And obviously what they're doing is, because they're only scheduling the group games at the moment rather than the cross-group games.
Yeah,
they're taking the opportunity to not commit themselves as well, which I think is smart.
Yes, exactly. And like they mention, all the clubs agreed to this idea very quickly. And like you mentioned, it means that there'll be some exciting competition with some of the local teams. There might be some rivalries that start to either heat up or kind of reignite themselves based on the geographical locations. And also they've mentioned avoiding risks, long trips, hotel stays, if, like Chris mentioned, if things start to go down. But yeah, that's pretty much all the news you need to see from the German DL. Chris, what are your thoughts on the announcement a couple of weeks ago, which we'll talk about it now because a few weeks have passed, that the DL, they've got a plan for their season. What are your thoughts?
Yes, no, I like it. I see any hockey I'm all for. And what I like is the fact that, and it's going to be the same with the Elite League, which we'll talk about in a moment, that they've had the opportunity to sit down, talk to all the clubs, plan it properly, and see what the situation is going to be. I don't know personally what the situation is regarding spectators and if there's limits and what have you in Germany, or if it's all behind closed doors. I know they're all being, all the games are being shown live, and considering it's free, I suspect that it might be behind closed doors. But yeah, it's really positive, and any hockey is good hockey. Players are picking up wages. These teams are getting a product back out on the ice for the fans to enjoy, and maybe with fans being able to watch on TV at home, it might bring some new people in as well who are maybe a bit unsure, don't want to spend however many euros, let's say 20 euros for a ticket if they're not too sure, and they can watch it on TV first.
Or maybe their kind of favourite sport is still on ice, for want of a better word, because of the current situation, and they see another sport's playing, they're like, okay, I'm going to become a Adler Mannheim fan. So, excuse me, there's going to be... I'm glad to see that Germany's getting some hockey back. The DL is a good league in Europe. They're not up the top, but as we've seen with the NHL entry draft recently, they are producing some solid hockey players over there in Germany. At the moment, they're a little bit few and far between than what I think a lot of Germans would like, but at the end of the day, they've got them. They're doing far better than the UK, for example, is in terms of creating NHL-ready prospects and all of that stuff. But congratulations to the DL. Congratulations to Germany. Hopefully it all works out for you guys. We're obviously going to cover the DL as it starts and keep you up to date with the latest scores and standings and some of the news that happens with it. But, Chris, let's talk about the biggest piece of news for us personally that we want to discuss. And we're probably going to end up going into this for quite a while, so we may as well jump into it.
Well, I'm going to try not to so that it's not too long.
Okay, fair enough. So I've got two different things that I know Chris will want me to make sure that I don't forget. First off is an article that was released last Friday on November 27th by the Elite Ice Hockey League website. So this is the news about the Elite Ice Hockey League. So the British UK League, we obviously talked about it with Ben Bounds last week. Here's the latest update. So EIHL looking into January return. So, as this reads, further to the government's announcement that the Elite League has been included in the government's winter survival package, talks are progressing about the possibility of when top-flight ice hockey could get back on the ice. As it was communicated on Thursday afternoon, so it would have been Thursday, November 26th, Sport England, which is kind of our governing body for sports and kind of budget allocations for sports and kind of helping to grow sports here in England. So not the entire UK, I might add, just the country of England, so not Scotland.
That's a key point. Yes. I'll go into that more in a bit.
So not Scotland, not Wales, not Northern Ireland, just England, where only half the teams roughly are located. So Sport England has allocated up to £4 million in funding for the Elite League to resume, while the EIHL is working with the remaining 5 teams, which are obviously Belfast in Northern Ireland, the 3 Scottish teams, and Cardiff in Wales, to understand what support will be available for the devolved administrations. And this is from the league chairman, Tony Smith. Quote, we are looking at dates for a January start, as this is part of the requirement of the funding. Obviously, we still have to be cautious and can't promise anything concrete, as a lot of our planning depends entirely on dealing with different agencies across the UK and kind of cross-country governments and administrations. But we are drawing up plans now about how we could get back onto the ice, playing competitive games at the beginning of 2021. With Great Britain in the elite group of the World Championships, we are time limited regarding how long we can play before we need to release national team players for the tournament. Realistically, knowing we need to finish in April means starting as soon as we can to schedule in enough games. He concluded, things have moved fast since the UK government's initial announcement, and we need them to keep doing so over the next fortnight to make sure that we have as long to play as possible. Then, what followed, I believe, was yesterday, was an announcement from Nottingham Panthers owner Neil Black, who did an interview with BBC Nottingham Sport, outlining the supposed plan. This is coming from somebody within the Elite League and very much involved in the Elite League and one of the biggest teams in the league. Supposedly the plan is, if their plan is given the green light, the current plan as it stands right now is to have an Elite League season potentially starting in January or late January, maybe early January, sometime in January. 6 different teams, which I would imagine are the 6 teams based in England,
It's the 5 English teams and Cardiff is what is expected at the moment.
Okay.
The 3 Scottish teams have already come out like earlier in the year and said we can't see ourselves playing in this 2021 season at all. And obviously Belfast is a lot more difficult logistically, being over in Northern Ireland and needing flights and what have you. So the plan is the 5 English teams, Nottingham, Sheffield, Manchester, Coventry and Guildford, plus the Cardiff Devils.
Okay, fair enough. And then they're going to be playing in COVID-secure bubbles, have mass testing, and supposedly an import limit of up to 10 different imports, and all of the games live streamed, which for Nottingham Panthers fans, they'll be very happy to hear about that, because we don't exactly get live streamed games very often. Yeah. But it's important. The one thing I do want to mention before I get your thoughts here, Chris, and you probably would have mentioned it anyway, but some of you might be thinking, oh, well, if they're getting £4 million and they're only playing 6 teams, like, what's the point? Why not divvy up that money between all the different teams? Make it so it's, all of the teams have the necessary funds to put a team on the ice and recruit and make sure their finances are in order. You know how we mentioned it was Sport England? That £4 million is only being divided by the teams based in England, and they're only getting that money provided they play some semblance of a season. So if they don't play, if the Elite League decides, actually, no team's going to play, we're just going to cancel the season altogether, because obviously they suspended it a little while ago, then the league does not receive that £4 million. So let's be perfectly honest here, folks. The Elite League is going to have a season now that they've got £4 million in the bank waiting to be added to their collection. The question is how it's going to run. So Chris, take it away. Give us your thoughts.
Yeah, so the thoughts is, as we said from Neil Black, I made a lot of notes from his interview, and we've been looking at the reaction over the last day. So as we said, we're thinking a 6-team season over 12 weeks, so that is likely to be maybe 20 games, maybe more. We don't actually know entirely yet. But if you think you've got to play 5 other teams, home and away twice, it is 20 games. They may go to 30 if they can. We don't really know.
Yeah.
As you mentioned, a full bubble, whether that be putting players up in hotels or what have you, with mass testing minimum twice a week, and somewhere to promote more Brits. He wants around 50 Brits at least.
Okay.
So we're talking somewhere between 8 to 10 imports, roughly. Which, as Neil Black on his interview yesterday said, suits the Panthers just fine, because the last time we had 10 imports, we won the Grand Slam.
There you go.
So he's more than happy. And again, towards the end of January, again, speaking to Neil Black, he thinks that we are north of 50% now chance of getting a season, whereas a month ago he would have said less than 10%. But he's now saying north of 50%. And they still want a finals weekend. Which is likely to be held in Nottingham, as it usually is. His initial thinking, although there is no kind of, confirmed thing around this, is that the top 4 out of the 6 teams would go straight into finals weekend.
Okay.
So yeah, hopefully we'll get, a bit more information soon. But as you said, they only get the 4 million, which would be £800,000 each per team, unless the league gets some of it to help out with that as well, which, of course, they would need to because of referees and all the rest of it.
Yep.
So there's enough there for teams. The idea being to play quite a few Brits and only have a few imports to get the league going. The other thing that I found it interesting, the streaming.
Yes.
Now, again, it's yet to be confirmed. I suspect I already know the answer, but what the situation with the streaming is it free? Is it behind a paywall? I sense I already know the answer.
Yes. Yeah.
And so I think that may well be part of the argument that the Elite League are going to be able to put to these teams as well, is, okay, look, we're going to cover the player wages, all the rest of it from this money from the government. And then we can obviously top that up with what we're hoping is going to be quite a bit of money from streaming. If you consider, roughly £10 a game? I know some teams are £8. Some are getting more than that, and it was a bit silly, but
Sheffield.
Okay.
What?
So take £10 a game because it will make the maths easy.
Yep.
Let's take the Panthers at, let's say, 5,000 people. That's probably from 3,000 households, roughly.
Yep.
Something along that. So 3,000 paying £10, 30,000 a game. It does make a difference.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming that is going to be somewhere that we can start to recoup some money.
While you're on the topic of that, because I can imagine you're wanting to move on to some of the other thoughts you had, I just want to make sure I get this in here. Obviously, in my opinion, it will suck if Belfast aren't a part of it. It'll suck if the Scotland team, 3 Scotland teams aren't a part of it, because let's be honest, it's not going to be a complete elite league. It's not going to be some might say it's kind of, like the argument they made with the NHL and the Stanley Cup is kind of like, it's not a real Stanley Cup championship because, it was in a bubble, etc., no fans and all that stuff. Like, there's going to be some debate about whether this can be considered like a quote-unquote legitimate elite ice hockey league season. And I think that there's an argument to make there. Whether it's a completely fair one to make, given the circumstances, that's certainly up for debate also. But the one good thing that I think could come out of this is the money. If they're having to live stream each of these games, we could actually be in a position where every single team in the Elite League, cough, cough, Nottingham, cough, cough, Glasgow, if they actually end up being in the league somehow. But like, all of these teams might have very competent streaming services set up with the extra funding that they're being given. And that could have such a great impact for future seasons, you know, like maybe thinking about the long game, for example, you know?
I mean, I think Nottingham in particular, we know already has a very competent service, because they do. I mean, I've seen them up in the boxes when I've been reporting for the BBC.
They just never use it.
They have a whole box, and you know, they've got the camera system, they've got the commentary, they put out a really good highlights package. The thing with Nottingham is it's a choice that they don't do it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, we'll have to see what everything is. I don't yet know whether or not I'm going to get to do any reporting on it this season or not. Not just, I mean, doing the actual reporting on the games is easy enough, because you can easily stay distance away. And when you're up in the gantry, it's whether, you know, I'll be doing any BBC stuff, because they might want to reduce the people going into the office, and they probably don't want someone like me coming in from outside, touching everything and going again.
Nice things.
you know what I mean? And the other thing that Neil Black said, and we had a rough idea of it. We already knew that ice hockey was the most spectated indoor sports in the UK. The other thing he mentioned, which I really found interesting, was that the Nottingham Panthers and the Sheffield Steelers are the biggest supported teams outside of football and rugby.
Really?
Yeah.
I did not know that.
I'm going to guess that's on like average attendance. But outside of football and rugby, the Panthers and the Steelers are the UK's two biggest supported sides.
So from one perspective, you can certainly understand why the government is wanting to commit so much money to both those teams and the rest of the league in order to, you know, help kickstart the league back up and generate some money towards the economy and everything. But at the same time, I really do feel sorry at the moment for the Belfast Giants fans and the Scottish fans, because whilst everybody else is getting so excited, they're thinking, because obviously we've heard this news and now everybody's thinking, yes, there is a season going to go ahead. Like, let's just hold our horses here for a second. There's no guarantee still. Does it look like we're going to get a season? Yes. It looks like it's trending that way. But like we've seen with everything that's happened this year, something else could come along and completely change it from one week to the next. It's more, you've got to kind of take everything with not necessarily with a pinch of salt, but kind of be somewhat apprehensive and be patient with a lot of these things, because they're not going to get solved overnight. And it's one of those situations where I can understand Elite League fans getting super excited, especially if your team is currently based in England. You're like, okay, my team's going to get to play some games. Like the NIHL streaming series has had its fair share of success. There's obviously that desire for Elite League hockey, getting some of these big imports back into the league, you know, having some semblance of a season, whether it's quote unquote legitimate or not, depending on who you ask. But I really do feel for those other teams that might be kind of left as collateral for kind of like, they're the sacrifice we've had to make to have the season. Now, does that mean that they're automatically not going to be in the season? Unless, because we still have the opportunity for the British government or the Elite League to make an agreement with the Northern Irish government and the Scottish government and kind of get something figured out, you know?
The teams in those countries have to go to their own government. So I think with the announcement at the moment, what they're trying to avoid is saying to the three Scottish teams, for example, yes, can we be part of this bubble? And then the Scottish government says you're not having any money. Yeah. And then obviously it would just completely ruin the club. The other thing to point out is that for the teams who are currently in the tightest restrictions in England, there would be no fans.
Yes.
I believe, I could be wrong because I haven't got the map up in front of me, nor do I have any desire to look at that depressing thing again, that only Guildford would be allowed to have fans at the moment because they're tier 2.
Okay.
So that would be up to 1,000 fans or 50% capacity, whatever is lower.
Okay.
And the other thing that you mentioned earlier, which I will quickly touch on before we go into our bonus clips, is that you mentioned how people were saying, "Oh, will the NHL have an asterisk against it because it's not really a proper season?" And I think obviously the fact that they did a full-on best of 7 playoff series, all the rest of it, obviously nullified that.
Yeah.
With the Elite League, you're only playing half the games and having half the teams. I kind of think you can't really avoid having an asterisk against it this year.
Yeah.
If it happens, particularly, I think there's going to be a lot of social media banter between certain sets of supporters if one of the teams wins the league, and they'll just go, "It wasn't a real league," and all the rest of it.
Yeah, especially if it's like the Steelers or something, for example. Like the rest of the Elite League is going to go absolutely nuts if they win it.
Yeah. The one final point before we move on is that, as Neil Black said in his interview, and as we knew from a long time before, the league have said we need about a month to get ready, and players to get together, teams to sort out a roster, etc. So once teams start doing that, which if we want a mid-January, late January start, has got to be in the next week, fortnight. Once that starts, it's not really something that can stop. So once the teams start signing players to contracts, that's the point, to me at least, where you go, yeah, okay, we've definitely got something.
Yeah, the first domino's kind of fallen, and it's like, okay. Yeah. The only other thing I would suggest then, kind of to finish up here, and maybe we could kind of pick this up next week, is potentially what about the opportunity of kind of bringing the Belfast Giants team over to England and the Scottish teams into England and kind of having them bubble somewhere in England in order to take part in the league? Maybe that's an option that they could go with. Obviously, there'd be a lot of costs that would be involved with that, but I don't see why they couldn't kind of train. They might be able to use a different rink as their home arena. I know it'd be very difficult, and it might not give the teams, like sort of the organizations or the owners, as much revenue gained compared, but I guess it's kind of, maybe that's one of the options they might explore, to kind of be like, okay, well, Belfast, if you want to take part, you're going to have to come and quarantine here for X amount of days and then take part and use X arena as your home arena. Yeah, it might be limited capacity, but if nobody can come and watch them anyway, what does it matter, you know?
I would say that, and again, this is an assumption, but I would say that somebody has been doing the maths.
Yes.
And if you split 4 million between 10 teams, that's 400,000.
Yep.
If you then take off what's needed for the referees and etc., let's say each team gets 350,000 as argument's sake.
Yeah.
Off a team of 22 players plus coaching staff, 300, let's say 30 people.
Yeah.
So divide that again. You're talking about £1,000 per person. If you're bringing the Scottish teams down for 3 months and you've got to put them up in a bubble stroke hotel, that cost is going to be way more than £1,000 per person. And I think that is why that's not happening.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine it's been an idea that's kind of been thrown about within the meetings, but then, like you mentioned, somebody comes out with a logical answer to it and they're like, okay. It's kind of like, in an ideal world, that would be a great answer if this was the NHL and they had millions and millions and millions and millions of pounds to give to every single franchise.
Exactly.
Even if they're struggling, but you know, yeah.
Yeah, and that's an assumption using very rough figures just to make the maths easy, but I suspect that would be probably a reason behind that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like we mentioned, we'll probably keep you up to date over the next couple of weeks. There won't be as big of a news necessarily until we know for sure that the season is starting. So, within the next couple of weeks, obviously we do talk about the Elite League a lot on this podcast. There might be some little updates as to, okay, it's been confirmed that the Scottish teams and Belfast aren't taking part. Because that hasn't been confirmed yet. Let's be perfectly honest here, folks. Hasn't been confirmed yet. It's looking unlikely, but it hasn't been confirmed. Or, you know, talk about how long the season's going to be, or kind of, as soon as we know information for the next episode, we'll keep you updated, but it'll be less of a big topic compared to this week, necessarily. So we've had a really interesting episode here, Chris. We've talked about a lot of different stuff. It's quite a long episode compared to some of the other ones we've done.
It was a long episode. I'm very, very hungry.
Me too. So you know what? We're going to go eat some food in our respective houses, and once you finish watching this, you should go eat some food too. Whether you've just had dinner, I don't care. Go and eat some more food. Be like us. No, but anyway, on that note, we're going to end this week's episode of the Europuck podcast. thank you for joining us. We hope you've enjoyed. Do let us know what you think about the new graphics that we've got up here. I do like this one for the intros and outros. It looks very nice. We might make a slight change to the one showing the articles, so we can kind of make the articles a little bit bigger towards the bottom of the screen. I'll talk to Dylan and Ish and see if we can get that figured out on the network. But if you want to keep updated on all things Europuck podcast, or send us your thoughts, opinions, or questions, either from today's show or for our next show, if you want us to talk about a certain topic, if you've got a certain guest that you want us to bring onto the show, as you can see on the screen right now, if you're watching the YouTube one, upload. If not, at Europuck Podcast on Twitter, at Europuck Podcast on Instagram. Very easy. And then, if you enjoyed listening to either or both of your hosts today, which I hope you did if you've made it this far into the bloody episode, then you can follow myself on Twitter at OddmanRushYT or Chris at Chris_Gadsby. But thanks again for listening, guys, and we'll see you again next time. Have a good one, folks.